Hello, this is part 2 of how I'm putting this quilt together. I'll link up part 1 here where I talked about how I got these designs onto fabric. And in today's video I'm going to talk about how I'm stitching it and how I'm thinking of binding it and the sort of decision process and all that. So for each, because I want to get a slightly quilted effect, for each piece I'm using a layer of felt and then I'm using this dark hand-dyed fabric, and if you look at the back here, that's sort of how you can see. Then I actually quite I like to keep the back quite neat, and I actually like the effect because you can see this, because it's just against a dark background with no detail, you can see the stitching much more clearly. So what I've been doing, I often just baste with a thread, but because I'm not sure I'm going to stitch all the areas, I'm actually using a spray adhesive so that it doesn't bubble up or anything. And I'm just using this. I'm finding this quite good for mounting light materials. I like this because it's slightly repositionable before it dries completely, so if you don't get it right the first time. So I get my bit of felt and then I just make sure to get it in the middle as much as possible. So I'm just going to take this up. And you don't need very much. And do the same thing, just put a little bit of the spray mount on just to keep it in position. And I'm not worrying about every little bit has got to stick to it, it's just got to be enough to hold it while I stitch. So that will be fine. What I'm most concerned is just to get the grain matched up, so the top fabric and the bottom fabric are all in alignment. So this is now my sandwich and I can start sewing. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about bindings, because more often than not you get sort of two, I mean there are variations, but there are two main types, which is you have a binding and you have a facing. Now a binding is when you attach either a contrasting, or it doesn't have to be, you might want to blend it in. Here I wanted to do a contrasting one. This is a little piece I did on the peppered moth. If any of you have studied that in biology at school, it's quite famous, where it showed evolution happening because the moths that were dark, this was in industrial Britain, survived better than the pale ones because the birds could spot the pale ones and would eat those, but the dark ones survived. So it's a lovely sort of simple way of looking at evolution. Anyway, that's by the by. So I just did a very simple narrow binding on that. That's a hanging sleeve. And then on this one, which is another moth, I have got a thing about moths, it's true, is that one called the tissue moth, which is such a beautiful moth. And I wanted this to look slightly more naturalistic, I suppose. So I didn't want an edge. Because this is sort of like a tree that it's sitting on, I wanted you to sort of think of it like that. So you do something called a facing, where all the edge material goes at the back. Now that's something I'm going to consider with the whole piece, because if I'm doing smaller ones, but I want them to look like they're part of a whole, I think using this kind of edging is going to be more successful. So that's probably what I'm going to do with these ones. But that's still to be decided, and I'll work that out as I go on. But let me just show you how I do the stitching on here. So I've got this table, this is a specialised sewing table. Oops, it means, as you can see, the sewing machine is lowered on a shelf, and then you have a bit of plastic that when you're ordering it, you have to say what type of sewing machine you have, and they make that to fit it. So if ever I change the sewing machine, I'll have to change that bit as well. But what it means is that the bed of the sewing bed is now the same height as everything else. So you can see if you're moving something around, you know, and this is quite small, so it's not too bad, you've got more room. Because as I was saying, it's the ease that you can move this around that will determine the quality of your stitch, really. And when you see this being done, it probably looks a bit kind of, oh gosh, that looks quite tricky. But it's one of those things, a bit like learning to drive when you're trying to find the biting point. First, when you first try it, you think, oh, I'm never going to be able to do it. But if you keep practicing, just practice, and you get muscle memory. And even if I haven't done it for a while, it's so ingrained now. So what I'm going to do with this is, I've got a mixture of an old print of sort of a biological diagram of wings, plus I've got, this was from a cyanotype I did of some actual feathers, and I'm going to do a sort of fill-in stitch around the wings. And I think it's only once I've done that I'll need to decide. I don't really want to sew into the wings because they're such fine lines that I think it wouldn't help it to be stitched over, but that is quite a big piece not to be stitched, so I'll just have to see. I'm going to do, so what you should always do is, I mean, it doesn't really matter so much on a small piece like this, but you start in the middle and you work your way out, just so that if you started at one end and then you met another bit of stitching there, you might get a little bit of fabric rising up. So, but if you work out, then you avoid that. And you can go in all directions. Sometimes I lift up the foot and turn it round. And what you have with the setup, you have something called feed dogs, which is if you do regular sewing, you have these little caterpillar tracks. They've just popped up now. So you're feeding the fabric through, and that's helping it come through straight and at an even rate. So most machines have a button where you lower those, and I've also got a sort of quilting foot which has a spring, but the main thing is that it's see-through. I mean, some people don't use that at all, just use the needle. I've just got used to doing it like this, but it means you can see where you're going, because all the time, especially with a fill-in stitch, you're trying to avoid being trapped because you want as continuous a line as possible. So this is quite a small area, if I went up there and then got to there, I might not be able to fit through there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start from there and go around, and then I'll do another session where I'm starting from there. I mean, you could do a very small one. And I'm going to do, it's sort of, I don't even know what you've got. It's sort of just lots of little lines, so sharp corners, and I'm moving around all the time. As I say, it's a fill-in stitch, and what's good about it is you can get into small spaces with it, and you can make your shapes a little bit bigger depending on the shape. Anyway, I will show you me doing it. In fact, it probably isn't the best example because I'm using pale thread on a light background. So I will, although I'm going to do this now, I will probably show you a close-up of something that's more contrasting so you can see what I'm doing. But I need to get it done. So I've got 3 months till my exhibition, and I've got a lot of pieces, as you can see, I've got a lot of pieces already, but I've got some ideas in my head that I'd really like to include. We'll just have to see how long I get on. And there are various different ways. Sometimes the fabric's very slippery, and I have used, you get these special gloves with sort of knobbly bits that give you more friction so that you can hold, because you want it smoothly underneath, but you want to be able to hold it. And I've recently discovered these, which are actually made specially for, and I do use that quite a bit, but I won't because it might block it. I think with a piece this small I should be okay. And I've just got it on the ordinary straight stitch, but it's the speed at which I both put my foot on the pedal and how quickly I move the fabric that determines the length of the stitch. So since I recorded the other footage that you've seen, I have been experimenting a bit with binding, and you can see that with this one, I'll give you a close-up, I have put a regular binding on, but I've made it white because I thought, because I'm sort of showing how, because I'm recreating pages of my sketchbook, I kind of quite like that idea. So I thought if I bind them in white, it kind of looks a bit more like the page. Anyway, I've still got to think about how I'm going to display them all together. So that will be in my next video. So I hope you'll join me for that.